and Alabama beats Georgia by a score of 41-34 in what is an instant classic. This game, started out in a way that Georgia fans couldn't have dreamed of, and even Alabama fans couldn't have dreamed of. Alabama scores on their opening. Georgia wins the coin toss. Alabama scores on the opening possession. Then a punt. Alabama scores again. An interception. Alabama scores again. Now it's 21-0. Punt. Alabama scores again after a Jalen Milroe run on 4th and 1. And Alabama's up 28-0. And it really starts to look like Alabama may just run away with this game. Maybe Georgia isn't as good as anybody thinks they are. Maybe this is, it's very clear this team is without the offensive weapons of McConkey and Bowers. They've got some guys, but it's very clear that maybe Beck is just overmatched. And then Georgia is able to score to make it 28-7, and it felt like Alabama started playing a little bit more conservative. The next drive, Alabama drives down the field. They stayed pretty aggressive. We drive down the field, and there is a interception by Milroe, which we'll talk about. And the interception, if you did not watch the game, was, I can't say it's not on Milroe at all, but it definitely wasn't fully on Milroe. He threw it slightly behind his tight end. Dupree gets his hands on the ball, but the defender, it's a little bit on his back hip. The defender makes a good play to hit him right as he, is bobbling the ball. It pops up. Georgia gets the interception. Alabama immediately follows that up with, in my opinion, one of the craziest plays that I've seen a defensive coordinator make. It's 3rd and 10 from the 5-yard line for Georgia. And Kane Womack calls an engage 8. He blitzes 8 guys, 3 DBs in coverage, and they get to Carson Beck. After an intentional grounding, it's a pleading by Kalen DeBoer, like, hey, that's grounding. The refs finally do agree that it's intentional grounding, flag drops, and you have a safety, and we go into the half at 30-7. And most Alabama fans at this moment think, hey, this game is over. Alabama has completely taken over. Alabama has this game in the bag. Yet there was a lot of football still to be played. And Georgia comes back in that second half, especially in that fourth quarter, and eventually actually takes the lead. Takes the lead 34-33 before the late game heroics of Ryan Williams. And I'm sure you have seen the catch. If you have not, pause this and go look at it. Williams makes a catch on the sideline, deep shot from Jalen. Kalen talked about it in the post game that where that ball was placed, being back shoulder, was very intentional, right? It was a very intentional throw by Jalen. He put it right where only Ryan could get it. Ryan has body control like I've never seen out of a freshman. He catches the ball, and then what he does after the catch with the dead leg move to make 2 5-star defensive backs run into each other and, just hits on the gas to be able to score from 75 yards out to retake the lead 41-34, which inevitably ends up winning the game, was just absolutely incredible, right? We're going to talk a little bit more about these guys, but just want to give everybody a rundown that may not have seen the game. And then finally, the game ends on a Zabian Brown interception. Carson Beck gets picked off for his 3rd time. This time it was they had been throwing at Zabian Brown all game. A lot of the big shots had been at Zabian Brown. One of the touchdowns earlier, they had Brown in press coverage. They get a touchdown on him, and Brown was asked after the game about it, and it sounded like Mo Linguist, the defensive backs coach, as well as Kane, were telling, hey, watch out for the back shoulder throw. If he goes back shoulder, this is what you need to look out for. And in the play that the interception's on, we're not in press coverage. He sees the receiver, where he feels like the ball's going to be back shoulder. Beck floats it like he had done a few times in this game. It really felt like Alabama could have intercepted Beck a couple more times than they actually did. I know Malachi Moore dropped an interception. I think Keon Sabb dropped an interception. There were a few other interceptions where it just felt like Beck was floating it instead of putting the actual, zip on the ball that it needed. He floats it a little bit. Brown reads it perfectly, comes up with a game-saving interception. And now what everyone's going to talk about is that Alabama has 2 freshmen that were the number 2 that just absolutely came up clutch in game time, right? With less than 2 minutes to go, you have Ryan Williams catching the touchdown to win to go up, and then Xavier Brown catching the interception to end up winning the game. Just two freshmen that are contributing at the highest level in the biggest game on the biggest stage. There's 100,000 people in the stadium. Trump was there. There's, all of the media was there. Saban's there. Miss Terry's the guest picker. Just all of the hoopla to a degree around this game, and two freshmen come up on the absolute biggest stage and win this game. So let's get a little bit more into the stats. That's, kind of a quick rundown of what the game was. But here's, kind of my thoughts. So on the offense, there's three people/position groups that I want to highlight. First and foremost, it has to be Jalen Milroe. For everything that was said about Jalen Milroe's intermediate passing game, his intermediate passing game in this Georgia game was absolutely actually incredible. He was 6 of 9 on intermediate passes. He goes 11 for 11 to start the game. Ends up 27 of 33 for 374 and 2 touchdowns. Like I said, he does have the one interception that was a little bit more of a drop than it was an interception. Like I said, not the best throw, but definitely not completely on Milroe. He made the right read, just the throw was a little off. But by and large, Milroe in this game was absolutely phenomenal. You could tell that he was very comfortable with the ball. He was not second-guessing himself. He was using his legs when he needed to use his legs. He was using his arm when he needed to use his arm. It was very clear that he was taking full control of Kalen's offense. And Kalen was asked about this. He was asked about this after the game, and he talked about how he thought that Jalen had taken a step up in that Wisconsin game, and over the last 2 weeks he had taken even bigger steps, and that he was really kind of unlocking more of the offense, so to speak. And that he was being very comfortable on what he needed to do with the ball, how they wanted him to be, when to use his legs, again, when to use his arm, and that Jalen was coming into his own in a quarterback in DeBoer's system. And I thought that this was super obvious. Jalen ends up, like I said, with a 374 through the air. On the ground, he has 16 carries for 117 yards, 2 touchdowns. Kirby had nothing to do for Jalen Milroe. Kirby was absolutely lost. And Jalen Milroe is a big piece of that. Kirby, calls Jalen Milroe one of the best running backs in the country, but he can also throw. Because at the end of the day, Jalen Milroe as a runner is just as dangerous as him as a thrower if you don't watch out. And what happened because of this is early in the game, Kirby had tried to blitz a few times because of the issues that Alabama had on its offensive line, especially in that South Florida game. So Kirby tried to put some pressure, especially with having Mykel Williams, who tried to go in this game but was not 100%. Georgia had definitely had some issues on the defensive side with the injuries and just inability to get to Milroe. So he tried to bring some pressure early. And what happened is Milroe scrambled and Milroe burned him. And whenever Milroe started scrambling and burning Kirby, Kirby immediately got away from the blitzing and got into, I'm going to spy Milroe and I'm not going to let Milroe beat me with his legs. And when he did that, it gave Milroe all day to throw. And so what you saw later on in the game is Milroe had a clean pocket, and Milroe had a clean pocket however long he needed it. And the offensive line is that other group that, one of the other groups I want to talk about. The offensive line did not give up a single sack against Georgia. When you think about the struggles of the offensive line over the past season, and, even early in this season, we talked about what we saw, the steps forward we saw in that Wisconsin game, and hey, this is how good Alabama's offensive line can be if all the guys are healthy. I think this is the perfect example for what we meant by that, right? I was optimistic in saying, hey, I really liked what I saw in that Wisconsin game, and I think that it can move on to Georgia. I still thought Georgia was going to get a sack, right? I still believe in Kirby as a defensive coordinator and in his ability to coach a defense, and I thought they were going to get to Milroe. That doesn't end up happening. So Milroe ends up not getting sacked at all in this game. And honestly, it was a big difference because on the opposite side of the end, and I'll have one more guy I want to talk about on offense, but on the opposite side of the end for Alabama ends up getting 3 sacks against Carson Beck. And on top of that, a few of the pressures are what turned into the interceptions. right? Carson Beck, and obviously the safety as well, that I don't think got recorded as a sack because it was technically intentional grounding, but, would have been a sack if not. So, you have those types of pressures that definitely caused issues with Beck. And, that was a big difference in that piece of the game. So then when we go to the offense, the other last person on the offense that we have to talk about, and I've mentioned him already, but Ryan Williams. We've talked about him in multiple games now, but on the biggest stage, Ryan Williams showed up. And it was a situation where earlier in the game, he gets thrown at across the middle, deep against Malachi Starks, one of the best safeties in the country. Ryan Williams has the tip drill, tips it to himself for a long completion that sets up the field goal to end up going up 33-18, I believe at the time, or 33-15 at the time, to make it a 3-score game. And then Ryan Williams on the last big play for Alabama, they throw it deep, and Ryan Williams just has body control like I've never seen before, and is able to come down with a catch, and bigger than just the catch, the run after the catch. And that's what Kirby talked about, is he talked about, the reporters that asked him, like, hey, in the pregame we asked you, what are you going to do to stop Ryan Williams? Like, are you going to double him or this or that? And Kirby said, hey, I can't double him. He goes, they have Jalen Milroe. I cannot double Ryan Williams. I just don't have enough guys. And he goes, the catch isn't the problem, it's the run after the catch. And that's really what you saw in the big 75-yard touchdown that ends up winning the game is, yes, Ryan Williams made an incredible catch. But the real benefit of that was the dead leg that he ends up spinning to be able to cause the two Georgia DBs to run into each other. He turns on the jets, outruns two guys with an angle, and scores the touchdown, right? That's where Kirby was upset, is they can't get him on the ground. And that's just a benefit to Ryan Williams. Like, Ryan Williams, coming into this season, the question was, who's going to be Alabama's wide receiver 1? Is it really going to be a 17-year-old? And the answer is yes. I mean, the answer is clearly yes, and it's not even close. Not to say there aren't other guys on this team that can make very good catches. Jeremy Bernard, we use CJ Dupree big in this game, and we'll talk a little bit about the receivers here in a second. But, yes, Ryan Williams can be the number one guy. And apparently, and I saw a video where somebody was talking about something that was mentioned on the broadcast with Reese Davis, and apparently there was mentioned on the broadcast where it was that Ryan Williams comes in over the summer and is running with the threes. And then Jalen's like, hey, I don't know what we're doing. Like, this guy's got to run with the ones. And it was just like the reality of, like, hey, he's going to have to run with the ones. He's that good. That's the reality we live in. Like, he's a starter. And we've seen it, right? We've seen it from game one that Ryan Williams is everything that he's been hyped up to be. He has been absolutely incredible, and it's things that you can't fully coach. It's just innate. And that's been absolutely awesome. So the other thing I want to talk about that wide receiving core, like I said, Ryan definitely kind of the centerpiece of that room. But I thought the benefit, and this also kind of goes to Milroe, is one of the things, and Kalen talked about it even in his postgame, that they really liked and wanted to see is part of the reason why Ryan Williams is able to have the highlight reel catches and be able to take over a game kind of as he was, is he's not the only guy Alabama's throwing at, right? Alabama had 11 guys catch passes in this game. 6 of them even caught more than one pass, right? So when you've got 11 guys catching passes, 6 of them catching more than one, you got CJ Dupree catching 4, Jeremy Bernard catching 5, Cuevas that caught the touchdown in the Wisconsin game caught 2, Kobe Prentice caught 2, Justice Haynes out of the backfield caught 3. This is a situation where you want to try to put an emphasis on Ryan Williams, but if Jalen shows, hey, I will throw to whoever is open, right, and take what the defense gives me, that really hurts what a defense is going to try to do, because you can't just take away Ryan Williams. They'll let the other guys beat them, and that's what Alabama was content in doing for a large portion of this game is, you'd have Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard kind of going deep, and then you would have the underneath route of and the reason CJ Dupree ends up having 4 catches and Cuevas has 2 is that underneath route for 7 yards was there all day. And Jalen just kept taking it. There were multiple instances where Jalen just took the check down for 7 yards, then they get a run. Dupree ends up getting a 15-yard run of it. Cuevas gets an 18. I mean, just give it to your playmaker and let him go with it. And Jalen took exactly what the defense gave him. And I think that's something that you have not seen in the first few games. And people were curious if you were going to see it against Georgia because he just has not shown that ability yet. But he did in this game. And for that reason, Jalen goes to the top of the Heisman odds makers, and he will more than likely be in New York. Jalen looked incredible, and he deserves every bit of the recollection he's getting. So, want to shift over to the defense, and then at the end of this, I do want to talk about a few things that I am still concerned about, or at least want to talk about things that I was not happy with, just because I don't want this all to be like everything's rainbows and unicorns. Absolutely, you beat one of the best teams in the country. Alabama's officially ranked number one back for the first time since October of 2022. And, Kalen DeBoer now gets his first number one ranking ever. But I still, obviously there were some things that I think Alabama needs to clean up. And so we'll talk about that at the end. So we're going to shift over to the defense. On the defensive side of the game, there's a lot to talk about. So Alabama picks off Carson Beck 3 times. They get Carson Beck to fumble another time. And it really felt like what I mentioned was partially true, right? I mentioned in the pregame that I did not think Carson Beck under pressure was that great of a quarterback. I thought if you gave him time to throw, he was a really good quarterback. But if you could keep him in pressure, that he just was not the same quarterback. And I think that's true, right? I think the 3 interceptions and the fumble, Alabama was getting pressure on him, getting him outside of the pocket, and not giving him all day to throw. What happened in the second half was it almost felt like Alabama went so conservative on defense and on offense, quite frankly. But we'll talk about that in a minute. But they went so conservative on defense, they stopped bringing any pressure. And with a 4-man pressure and Alabama not getting to the quarterback, at least, causing a pressure, causing a hurry, Carson Beck had time to throw. His receivers were getting open, and he picked us apart, right? So that's why Carson Beck ends up actually having 439 yards through the air. Most of that had to do with the fact that Alabama stopped getting to the quarterback and getting him uncomfortable. But, in this game, you end up having Deontay Lawson has, an incredible game. He has 10 tackles, 7 solo. He had a sack, 2 tackles for loss. Just was an absolute animal in the center. We know how good Lawson is. Damani Jackson it is turning into a lockdown corner that you forget about because they just stopped throwing at him. Damani Jackson picks off Carson Beck early. It's a screen pass that Damani comes down on, breaks on the ball, makes a really good play on it. And really for the rest of the game, it didn't feel like they threw at Damani Jackson at all. He completely had locked down his side of the field. Nobody was throwing at him even a little bit. And that's a big reason why they kept throwing at Xavier Brown, which we talked about got the pick at the very end, right? And there actually was a really cool embrace that Nick Kelly was able to video of Kane Womack talking to Xavier Brown after the interception and after the game. He was congratulating him like, hey, dude, incredible fight you've shown. One of the greatest plays I've seen a freshman, be able to come up with in crunch time after getting thrown out or being thrown out all day. Just this is something kind of build your career off of. And it was just a really cool embrace. Check it out if you haven't seen it. Nick Kelly posted it on his Twitter. But that's the big thing, right? As our defense, you have we talked about the young guys in the secondary, and you were going to need somebody to step up, and you did, right? When it mattered most, you had a young guy step up, and that's huge, right? The other interceptions that you end up having is Jihad Campbell really had one just thrown kind of right at him. My girlfriend was like, was anybody even there? My opinion of it is I think there was some level of miscommunication with Beck and the receiver. One of them thought the route was different than what it was. And so on the broadcast, it really just looks like Beck throws it right to Jihad Campbell's chest. And he catches it for a super easy interception. And then, as I said, the last interception was the Xavier Brown interception to end the game. Malachi does have a couple of picks that I think he ends up dropping because, just he's so close, right? This is a game where, we had Georgia fans sitting in front of us. I didn't actually end up sitting in the student section. I sat kind of behind the Alabama recruits in this one, and there were some Georgia fans sitting in front of us, and these two guys, they were like, Beck just keeps floating it. He doesn't look like himself. Like, Alabama should probably have had 5 interceptions in this game, right? They were really unhappy with what they were seeing out of Beck. Obviously, this isn't a situation where you go to Gunnar Stockton. You got to stay with Beck. You don't want to kill his confidence. But Beck really, at moments in this game, did not seem to have it, right? He did not seem to be able to put the zip on the ball that he needed to win the game, quite frankly, because some of the throws were there, just not in the way that he threw them. And then you also end up having Quay Rusall, which we talked about coming into this game. We're not sure if he was going to be able to play. He was coming back from injury, and he does play. He's not a huge contributor in this game, but does have one massive play where he ends up causing Carson Beck to fumble. He gets to him, causes him to fumble, which Demarion Latham ends up getting, which was just a huge piece, right? You end up getting the fumble. Like I said, you get the fumble out of Beck. And, so people were making impact plays even that you may not have expected to even be able to play in this game, right? So that's the other thing I just wanted to talk about is, like, on the defensive side of the ball, you end up with 6 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, and just, like I said, a very, very good showing by the Alabama defense. In the first half, it was an absolute masterclass. In my opinion, the second half was they turned down the intensity because they had the lead, so they turned down the aggression, and that played into Georgia's hand and allowed them to do what they wanted to do. When they kept Georgia uncomfortable in the first half, it was all Alabama. And that's from an offense and defensive perspective, right? If we're going to talk about what Alabama, needs to kind of fix, or what I think I would like to see changed moving forward, or the things that maybe went wrong in this game, I think the play calling on both offense and defense is something that DeBoer and staff, and I trust in them, their ability to look at the game tape and see what happened. But it really felt like they turned down the intensity on both offense and defense and got so conservative that it ended up getting away from what Alabama did best in this game and what was so successful. And it almost cost us the game, right? You end up winning the game, but this is one of those where you don't want to have the win cause you to not fix what the problem was, right? Because Alabama absolutely, I think, was the better team in this game. Alabama deserved to win this game, but there was an issue, right? Allowing Georgia to come back from that much down is a problem. And in my opinion, the root cause of that problem was a combination of play calling on offense and defense. And it just was it moving to a conservative level. When they were more aggressive on offense and were taking the shots and were playing Alabama football, they were absolutely flawless and humming. And then in the second half, they went to trying to run the clock a lot more. And I understand you want to run the clock, but it's a situation where they were prioritizing running the clock over getting the first down and getting the touchdown. If you just get the first down and the touchdown, who cares what the clock says, right? If you're up by enough, the clock can say whatever it wants. And I think that's a situation that this team may not be, built to just, hand it off, run the clock, hand it off, run the clock, hand it off, run the clock, right? It makes a little bit more sense to, if you have to, like, use the short passing game as a part of the run game, as they normally do, right? Use that as a way to run the clock, because once Georgia started spying Jalen Milroe, you didn't have the Milroe runs that you could rely on to be able to stretch the chains, right? You're going to have a little bit more of the short passing, or maybe some more inside runs with the actual running backs, because your running backs in this game actually only ended up, Justice Haynes gets 6 runs. Jam Miller only gets 5, right? So Jalen gets 4 or 5 more runs than the running backs do combined. So it's a situation where I just think that Alabama was not effective in, if they're going to run out the clock. I don't like the way that they tried to do it. They also were snapping the ball with like 18 seconds left on the clock. If you're going to be super conservative and try to run out the clock, let's use the whole play clock, right? It felt like either you need to be aggressive and not worry about the play clock and just play your brand of football, or if you're going to be super conservative, let's actually use the whole play clock, right? It ends up working out in Alabama's favor. We have time to score at the end, right? It all ends up working out in the end. But again, I don't want the win to overshadow what could have gone wrong and what will need to be fixed moving forward. And again, like I mentioned on the defensive side of the ball, same kind of thing. Once the aggression, turned down, and there was some comments, and I think it was the college football nerds talked about Kane Womack blitzes on like 7% of plays. He is not somebody that brings a whole lot of pressure. He prefers just to play vision coverage and, play sound and sturdy defense. And I understand that, right? But some of the success you had in this game was when you brought unique pressures. When you brought some more complex pressures, it really got to Carson Beck and caused him to be more uncomfortable because he had to be really quick with his decision making. When you only rush 3 or 4, it allows him to go through his full progressions and actually process the way he needs to, and then he was elite, right? When he had no time, his quick decision making was not there, right? When he had plenty of time, Carson Beck was great. And so that's really the thing that I think, in the same way the offense needed to stay with the aggression, the defense should have done the same thing, right? And then to mention the special teams, I thought that James Burnett was completely fine. I thought that the field goal, after watching it back, I actually didn't think it was as close as it was, but the field goal by Graham, I'm glad it went through. Obviously, you might want to clean it up so you're not cheating the goalpost quite that close. But obviously it goes through all as well. But the one thing obviously you need to clean up on the special team side is the return, right? Cole Adams signals for the fair catch, but Ryan does not field it cleanly. And clearly, there's some level of coaching mistake that Cole kept kind of pleading with the ref, like, hey, I signaled a fair catch. And they clearly just didn't realize that if it's a fumble, you can't fair catch. It doesn't matter, right? You got to catch it clean in order for the fair catch to count. And so that's something that having Ryan Williams back there and, maybe Cole Adams' injury, and I actually kind of maybe would prefer having Jalen Mbakwe back there instead of Ryan Williams. Not obviously, I understand your ability of wanting to get Ryan on the field as much as possible, but I think maybe Mbakwe back there would have made a little bit more sense. Just either way, I think that that's a coaching piece that obviously they just need to clean up and make sure everyone's aware of what the actual rule is in that scenario, because that seems like some issue. The last thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about Kalen DeBoer. And I want to talk about Kalen DeBoer because this game, RG3 put on Twitter that this was his "I'm the captain now" game. And I think that's right. Coming into this season, it was, what is Alabama going to be without Nick Saban, right? Georgia in their mind was like, oh yeah, we're going to run the SEC now. We don't have to go through Saban. Did Kirby have an Alabama problem, or did he have a Saban problem? And it was a situation where most people were kind of preying on Alabama's downfall because they now no longer had the greatest coach of all time. And some of the more informed media were like, hey, you might want to watch out. This Kalen DeBoer guy is pretty good. And he ends up winning the game. And a stat that I saw put out on Twitter that's just absolutely incredible is Kalen DeBoer is now 30-3 as a power conference coach. He's a combined 6-0 against Kirby, Dan Lanning, and Steve Sarkisian. I mean, that's absolutely absurd. Absolutely absurd to be 30-3 as a power coach, 6-0 against 3 of what people consider some of the best coaches in the sport. And it's a situation where Kalen DeBoer has flowed this season into a seamless transition. Like an absolutely seamless transition that many thought impossible. And just props to him, right? He's done everything the way that he wants to do it. He obviously knows how to get some of the best out of his players. When you see Milroe, starting the season, and maybe they start with the runs, and now they're getting more and more and more into the offense.
and the progression that you've seen out of Milroe, the progression you've seen out of the offense, how good the defense has looked by and large, the buy-in that you see out of the players, it is very clear, in my opinion, that Kalen DeBoer has done exactly what he wants to do, right? Kalen DeBoer was a perfect replacement for Nick Saban and has shown to be that. And I just want to congratulate him because, I couldn't have ever expected that a transition from Nick Saban to his successor was going to go this smoothly. And just props to him because it's been absolutely incredible. One thing I will say for all of the people that say that Kalen DeBoer doesn't have any fire to him, do me a favor and watch the no call at the end of the first half when Alabama throws for it on 3rd and 5, I believe, 3rd and 6, and there's a guy draped all over Jeremy Bernard. Go back and watch that no call and see Kalen DeBoer about snap a headset in front of an official and just lose his mind. It's clear Kalen DeBoer has the fire. It just, he only uses it in a moment that he thinks he needs it, right? He's not somebody that's going to go absolutely crazy all the time, but when he goes crazy, there's something going on, right? And so that's really what I wanted to talk about. Like I said, I want to congratulate him because he's been absolutely incredible. And I think that, obviously it's a great time to be an Alabama fan. I'm sure opposing fans probably hate the idea of hearing that, but it's an absolutely incredible time to be an Alabama fan. And so we move on to next week, and we're going to be going to Nashville to take on Vandy. As I mentioned, I will cover that in the podcast on Wednesday. And so if you're interested in that, please subscribe to the channel.